Good evening, everyone. If we can get settled, and we'll go ahead and kick the meeting off.
I'm just gonna do the entire thing. Because it is what it is now. Just come here to the thing.
Ms. Case, if you'd like to call the roll, please.
Yes, sir. Dr. Mahakanen, Mr. Gonzalez, Ms. Houston, Mayor Tomides,
Here.
Mrs. Pruitt,
Here.
Mr. Gregson, Ms. Derrick. Okay, we have a quorum present.
Okay. Okay. Let me just see this agenda.
Jim Garber. Here. Travis Kelsey. Here. Angie Ramirez. Lee Porterfield. Betsy Gale Rand. Kate McCarty. Here. Sean DuPont. Here. We have quorum.
Okay. Thank everybody in the audience for coming, and I thank the Planning and Zoning Commissioners for coming again, and the City Council members and staff. Abby, were you going to lead us off and take us into the first item, please? Yes, if you'll read that.
Receive a staff presentation and participate in a joint workshop of the City Council and Planning and Zoning Commission facilitated by Diane Miller to discuss CodeSMTX, including, but not limited to, new water quality requirements, new drainage requirements, parking, corridor overlays, parkland dedication, and provide direction to staff.
Okay, Council, just one quick note. You'll see that there's just a few microphones, a few more than last time. Please, as you're speaking into them with any of your comments and questions, make sure that they're up and you can kind of hear a little bit when you've got it to the right location. That way the public at home can hear. And if you don't mind, just so we can keep the meeting moving along, if you'll motion to me if you want to speak or make comments, and we'll make sure we get you a microphone. Thank you, and Abby, take it away, please.
Voice. Oh, maybe not like that. Try that. Oh.
Okay. Oh, that's better. So Abby Gilfillan, Planning Manager, and tonight this is the second of two workshops talking about CodeSMTX. The purpose of tonight, it's a similar format to the last workshop. We've got different topics. Last time we talked about, overall, we were talking about existing neighborhoods. This time we're focusing on the environment as the main overarching issue that we'll be talking about tonight. Where these topics came from is that we have had the draft of our code. This has been a project that's been ongoing since 2014. The draft of our code went out in May 27th. And we went through a 6-month period there where we had a lot of public review and comment. We had over 1,000 comments. From all of that comment and public review, we selected out those 10 different issues that are more detailed issues where we received the most comments. And so that's what we're focusing on tonight, is the second 5 of those for this joint workshop. At the end of the workshop, we do have a next steps piece where we will be talking about how we're going to be using all of the comments and the feedback that we're receiving during this process, as well as moving forward on what are the next steps as we continue to move forward and looking at what sorts of amendments and refinements need to be made to the code as it moves through this approval process. So with that, Lori Moyer was going to start us off and talk about the overview of the environmental standards.
Okay.
Oh.
Hello?
No, maybe up. Go up.
Better?
There you
Okay. All right. If it's okay with everybody, I might just range around just a little bit after a day of sitting. Colette asked me to take a few minutes to kick off a discussion about the role of engineering and the environmental regulations that we're going to cover tonight, just to give you a little background. And so there's really 3 things that I want to touch upon. And as you'll see, I've written them down and I'll look at it, but I wanted to just kind of frame this. So the first thing I want to emphasize is that we are not changing any of our current processes. The types of permits and the types of approvals that are in place right now are going to remain. What we are changing is the design requirements associated with those. Most of the design changes that we're looking at are going to be reviewed and approved under a watershed protection plan. And that's one of the probably the most technically complex and encompassing approvals that we look at, because we cover a lot of information in those. And it touches on drainage, flood protection, and then now water quality. We've had water quality before, but that's now being expanded. So what I have for you, and I don't necessarily, Greg, if you would pass that around that way. What I have for you is a flow chart that shows when water quality permits come in. And this was not part of your material that was presented to you, but it's one that we have as a flow chart that we've developed internally. A watershed protection plan is required at concept plan, it's required at plating, and it's required at site. So we hit three phases of development with the watershed protection plan. So just about every process as development comes through needs to have a watershed. And so what we've done is we've allowed some flexibility with the watershed planning process. We want to be able to have the engineering information provided be reflective of the stage that the development plans are in. So we require that people come in early to begin to show that they can comply with requirements, but then as the development plans progress, then those requirements get refined. And I think this is important to the engineering community because we understand engineering costs are expensive. And when a development isn't quite certain of where it's going to go, we want to make sure that they understand the constraints and they're thinking about that in the process, but we want to make sure that the engineering analysis they do is appropriate for that stage. So again, same process, a little bit more refinement and additional environmental requirements. Second, the guiding principles and the changes that we are proposing reflect the goals of the comprehensive plan. The goals of the comprehensive plan were pretty clear. It was done with a full community involvement, additional LID requirements, the ability to use low impact in the community, to have environmental standards that are reflective of the area of the community. All those were things that we kept in mind. That was our lens as we moved forward with these changes. We also incorporated recommendations coming from our habitat conservation plan, that the associated water quality protection plan that was developed as part of it, and then also the San Marcos, Upper San Marcos watershed protection plan. Lots of protection plans have been developed in our area, and that was important for us to look at because we want to keep design requirements that reflect those goals. You know, it's kind of like all these plans say we want to achieve these goals, but what we have to come up with are the design guidelines that get you to those goals. And so what was important is that we looked at all of those and we looked at how do we identify design requirements that are going to get us to that place, and how do they reflect our local conditions, our climate, our topography, our geology. And so we spent quite a bit of time looking at that. These are not cut and paste regulations from the city of Austin or really any other city. These are things that we've spent some time really trying to craft specifically for San Marcos. So the third thing that I want to emphasize is that the success of these changes that we're proposing are increased with good education of the development community and the creation of a good technical manual to support them. So for us, the water quality changes and a lot of the things that we're proposing have come together in the last 6 months. Guiding principles and big picture input has come through the whole code process. Technical committee, you know, the think tank has provided some overall guidance, but we had to get right down into the weeds on some of this, and most of that's come together really within the last 6 months. So one of the things that we're going to propose to do in this adoption process that we're going through is we're going to have another open house with the development and environmental and engineering community to go through these new requirements. We did that with the floodplain. I think it's important that we have that opportunity to allow those folks that are going to use that to come in and sit and talk with us and understand what we're doing. We know that the changes that we are proposing are going to increase development costs. That's really a given because we are requiring more water quality. And to require more water quality, it requires additional cost. I don't want to say that that is not going to be the case. But what we've done with this code and what we want to do with a good technical manual is where we can, we want to reduce engineering costs. It's kind of like saying, I was putting this together, it's almost like what we want to create is a cookbook. We could tell the development community we want to have a cake, but if we don't provide them a cookbook that says, here's how we make our batter and here's the kind of frosting that's appropriate, they're going to come back with a Swedish chocolate cake, which is something my family eats. They're going to come back with a German chocolate cake. They're going to come back with an angel food cake. They're going to come back with a half-baked cake. We definitely receive those. We're going to see a lot of different types, and we don't want to discourage, innovation, but we also want to provide a framework so that when engineers come in, they can go directly in and know exactly what it is that we want to get to. And that takes a good technical manual. And it's not something that we have in place right now. We're in process on one for our floodplain modeling, which is another kind of complex analysis that needs to be done. We need to get working on this one for water quality and our upgrade and our drainage. And I think that will make a tremendous difference as we move forward. We're working on some scope to see if we can get someone to help us with this. It's not something we can handle internally with the workload that we have right now, but again, I think it's imperative to the success of this project. So 3 things to remember. We're not changing the existing process. The changes that we're proposing reflect the goals that came out of the comprehensive plan. The success of the changes are dependent on good education and good technical support for the development community. So with that, I'm going to take a breath. I've been kind of plowing through this. I want to take a minute to talk with you a little bit about Greg Schwarz, who is the engineer in my department that's been the lead on working on these changes. And I think sometimes I and the city don't emphasize enough the caliber of people that we need to hire in order to achieve the goals that the community desires. When we go out and we fill positions, we have to have people that are experienced enough and trained well enough to grasp these facts and review development plans in a way that helps this go forward, helps to make sure that we are achieving those goals. I've heard very much from the council that we want to make sure that the development community is adhering to our requirements. And that means that we have to have the staff and the expertise to do that. So Mr. Schwarz is coming up on 2 years now with the department. He has over 20 years of experience in both the public and the private sector, and his emphasis has been historically on hydrology and hydraulics, which is, the linchpin of what this is all about. You got to understand how the water flows. Sustainable site design, water quality, this is just right in everything that he enjoys doing is right what we've got him doing. And so I feel really blessed that I have someone on my staff that I can rely on to get down in these details, because this is not something that, you know, you just gloss over, where when you really want to understand it, you need someone that can get down into it. So again, since he's been with the city, we've given him and other staff members additional training in two-dimensional modeling, and he went to the National Low Impact Development Conference. So I feel like we've made some good investments in him to bring us this expertise to help us move forward. My entire department, I have a great bunch of engineers. Y'all know Richard Reynosa with floodplain, Ray Garcia. I mean, I just have a lot, and now what I have to do is build that resource structure to support them so they don't burn themselves out doing all the stuff we have for them to do. So with that, I'm going to let Greg get up here and walk you through the proposed changes.
All right, good evening. Can everybody hear me okay? Well, thank you, Lori, for the introduction. I think I've been in front of you guys at least once or twice, so hopefully I'm not that new of a face. And this evening I'm going to be talking to you guys about the new water quality requirements and also the new drainage requirements that we are proposing for the code. So there are 4 strategies by which we wanted to basically look at as far as these proposed revisions. And these 4 strategies basically come from, as Lori said, the Habitat Conservation Plan, the Comp Plan. Sure, you bet. Is that better? I think he turned up the mic there. So we had 4 strategies that we wanted to accomplish with this update, and all of them came from what we heard from the Comprehensive Plan, the Habitat Conservation Plan, Water Quality Protection Plan. We also got feedback from the think tank. We had the open house, got feedback from that. And we also, as Abby said, had the code available online where the public could comment. So we took all that and basically we came up with these strategies, which I'll talk about in more detail. But the 4 are, the first one, enhance and expand protection zones. We also wanted to expand stream water quality in buffer zones and also facilitate low impact development and also strengthen construction erosion controls. All right, as far as enhancing and expanding protection zones, our current code has 2 areas where we have water quality requirements, and they are located on the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone and in the San Marcos River Corridor. So the recharge zone on this map is this green area right here. And just to get you a little more oriented, if you haven't zeroed in on this, but this is IH-35 right here. San Marcos River is right here, and the Blanco River is right over here. So recharge zone and the corridor is hatched in blue, are 2 areas where we have protection zones, areas where we regulate water quality and require treatment. And our proposed revision, when it comes to the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, is to enhance the requirements. Our current code basically says if you're on the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, you're limited to an increase of no more than 20% of that which would occur naturally, and that's 20% of the total TSS, total suspended solids. So the proposed revision consists of changing that to 85% removal of total suspended solids, and in addition adding a capture of 1.25 inches from the developed area. That's a capture of runoff from the site of 1.25 inches. And I'll expand on that for just a moment. So what that means is that, and why it's 1.25 inches is basically if you have a 1.25 inch amount of depth on the site, rainfall, you basically capture that and either infiltrate it or release it over a period of 48 hours. So essentially on a average yearly basis, if you capture 1.25 inches, you're going to capture 80% of our total volume of runoff per year. So we have 33 inches per year, so 80% of that is going to be captured and either infiltrated or released over a period of 48 hours. So that does two things. That keeps water on the site more than having it run off. And secondly, it helps protect erosion on our streams. Studies have shown that 90% of our total suspended solids comes from stream erosion. So if we can protect our streams more, we are going to do a lot for water quality. So it's not just the total suspended solids that are running off your site, which contributes to degradation, but it's also the stream erosion itself. So that capturing that 1.25 inches helps with that. This is going to be required for both new and redevelopment. And in addition, on the recharge zone, impervious cover credit will not be allowed for pervious pavements. And that's because TCEQ requires a liner be placed underneath pervious pavement, and the outlet, so all that water that infiltrates through the pavement is captured and it must be released on top of the ground. So we see that as not following the intent of limiting impervious cover and allowing pervious pavement and allowing it to infiltrate. Since it's not allowed to infiltrate, then we don't believe it should be a credit.
Ms. Derrick.
When you're talking about redevelopment, what would qualify as redevelopment? Is that the 50% or more of the value of the structure?
Right. So what we're proposing is if for redevelopment, this is for all Chapter 6 water quality regulations, that if you're improving up to 25%, whether it's floor space or parking area of your site, then your new improvements have to be treated, have to follow the Chapter 6 requirements. If you're over 25% of that, then your whole site needs to come into compliance.
Thank you.
Okay. So why are we doing this? These requirements provide more protection to environmentally sensitive areas as recommended by the Water Quality Protection Plan, the WQPP. It's consistent with past development agreements and PDDs. For example, Paso Robles, La Cima, the cottages all required 85% removal of total suspended solids. And it also, as I mentioned, protects waterways from erosion. Okay, now we're moving on to the transition zone and contributing zone within the transition zone in our city. So remember, the green area is the recharge zone. This blue shaded area that you see here, that is contributing zone within the transition zone. And then this beige area along here is the transition zone. So right now we have no water quality requirements within the transition zone or the contributing zone in the transition zone. So we're looking to enhance and expand requirements in these areas. So the proposed revision is, if you're within these areas, you have 80% removal of increased total suspended solids. There's also a capture of 1.25 inches from the developed area, which I talked about previously. And again, this is required for both new development and redevelopment. So why are we doing this? Again, it provides more protection to environmentally sensitive areas as recommended by the WQPP. Again, it's consistent with past development agreements and PDDs. And also it protects our waterways from erosion.
So in the protection zones, why 80% removal of TSS and not 85?
So there's a bit of a difference between 80 and 85%. Obviously, your water quality is better leaving the site, and also your BMPs, your best management practice that you're using to treat it is going to be quite a bit bigger for 85%. And what we've heard from the comp plan and also from the think tank is that let's treat the more environmentally sensitive areas differently than less sensitive areas. And so that requirement of 80% is not quite as stringent because it's perhaps not on the most sensitive area of the city or one of the most sensitive areas, which is the recharge zone. But it could be. So the next area that we looked at to enhance and expand is the San Marcos River corridor. And again, the corridor is hatched in this blue area right here around the San Marcos River. And again, the Blanco River is right here. So right now, the current code says that 89% removal of increased TSS is required if you're within this corridor, and you must capture ½ inch of runoff from your developed area. And it's required for new development. And if you're in this area, there's a 30% maximum impervious cover. So with the proposed revision, we expanded the limits of the corridor. The corridor is still shown here. It's shaded light blue around here. The blue hatched area is the expansion of the corridor and what is now being called the San Marcos River Protection Zone. And this area essentially is the drainage area to the San Marcos River above the Blanco River. And if you're within that area, there is a requirement of 80% removal of increased TSS. There's also the capture of 1.25 inches of runoff, as I mentioned earlier, from the developed area. And it is required for new and also for redevelopment. And we also expanded the 30% maximum impervious cover limit area. So the area hatched in blue here is again the San Marcos River Protection Zone, and in that area you have the water quality requirement, but the area where you have the 30% maximum impervious cover is outlined in yellow here, which pretty much matches the old San Marcos River corridor, except for east of 35, it gets a little bit wider. So why did we do this? To expand protection as recommended again by the WQPP and also the comp plan. more area that drains to the river, the sensitive area in San Marcos is protected. And again, it protects waterways from erosion.
Sir, I have a question.
Sure.
Just to follow up with what Mr. Kelsey asked, we're looking at the San Marcos River, and I would assume that most folks in this room would suggest that the San Marcos River is as or more, precious to us than the recharge zone over the aquifer. Did we reduce the amount of TSS removal and the proposed revision down to 80% from 89? Or was that a typo?
No, that's correct. So the 89% previously was just for this light blue area, shaded area, light blue shaded area. So it was a higher standard, but for a very narrow corridor around the river. So since we expanded the limits by which treatment is now required, we did lower the TSS standard since we're now treating more area.
Well,
There's no reason why we could not make it the same standard either.
The Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone is pretty large in itself, and we're at 85% there, right?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
The Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone is at the 85% level, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
So, I mean, this area is much smaller than that area.
Right.
So, okay, but I'm just curious why that change was made.
And again, there's no reason why we couldn't make it higher, either 85% or 89. And just to let you know too, 80% TSS removal is the state standard if you're on the recharge zone. So that's their minimum standard. So next, another strategy that we looked at in the code revision is to expand stream water quality and buffer zones. So in our current code, if you're inside the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, these water quality and buffer zones are required for drainage areas greater than 50 acres. And if you're outside the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, they're required for drainage areas greater than 120 acres. So with this code revision, if you're inside the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, we've changed it to 5 acres. And if you're outside, we've changed it from 120 to 50 acres. So basically what that means is right now our code would say limit the requirement of water quality and buffer zones to a certain extent of the watershed. It's either 50 acres or 120 acres based on where you're located. And now we've lowered the threshold such that we're expanding these water quality and buffer zones further up into watersheds to protect creeks and streams. So why have we done this? This expansion was recommended by the WQPP. And in addition, natural creeks and streams provide ecological and water quality benefits and often contain recharge features on the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone. So something else this code revision does is it facilitates low impact development. So some of the proposed revisions, or the proposed revisions that relate to this includes that it provides a standard. So the water quality standards that I talked about previously is a standard by which you can design your low impact development features for your site. Because if you don't have a standard, then it's left up in the air to what exactly you're going to do as far as low impact development. Second, the code removes barriers, the proposed code amendment removes barriers to lid. One of those examples of barriers removed is that currently, if you had a low impact development feature, it didn't count towards your landscape area that you need. So with the update, you can include that low impact development feature as credit towards your landscape requirement. And in addition, as Lori Moyer talked about, we are going to revise our stormwater technical manual and also the lid strategies in there so that we can provide something available for engineers and developers so they can specifically know what they can do to provide lid and meet some of the standards. So why are we doing this? To make lid easier to incorporate in developments, and lid interests were cited in the comp plan. So we want to be, we want to include that in the code. We also wanted to strengthen construction erosion controls. And the code actually already has, and so does our stormwater technical manual, requirements and ways to contain sediment on your site during construction. So one of the things we did was link our MS4 ordinance, which also outlines more measures in the code. And why do we do this? To, again, further protect water quality during site construction.
Mr. Kelsey?
Yes, sir. Just more of a comment than a question. How are we going to get better enforcement of erosion controls? Because we have these in place. Maybe this is to the council. Without enforcement, it doesn't mean anything. And you go all over town and see that it's not being enforced anywhere. So, not necessarily a question to you, sir, but maybe just to put out to all of us, like we got to figure out a way to hire somebody or make a team to go, because it's up to the citizens now to stay on top of these things. Just a comment.
Good point. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on it. Ms. Moyer?
So right now, and this is something that really is, planning has taken on the brunt of the enforcement side of it. They have 2 individuals that are on staff now that go out weekly and enforce commercial sites on that, and so that's huge. Ann Gabriel is sitting in the audience. She's one of the staff members, and then Teresa Velo. So they act as our enforcement arm. Our department, in terms of Greg and some of the engineers, provide technical assistance to them on that. But again, it is always a manpower issue on how much we are able to do it. The council previously gave direction for more inspection of those detention and water quality ponds. So we're looking on strategies to do that. But it all goes back to the number of bodies that you have available to do it. What we hope is, one, that as we get better information and we make sure when they come through that, first off, they start off with the plans being correct, that they're actually showing what's necessary, and that with these inspections that Ann and Teresa do, they're out there, helping. But that's where we are right now. And Shannon and Christy, is there anything you want to add?
The only thing I would say is that basically what our ladies do is they break the city up. So one goes west of 35 and the other one goes east of 35, and we have some really big projects. Kind of the way that it works is a project is not able to go forward with their site work until all of their erosion controls are in place. And so they literally go out and are not able to do their pre-con until that happens. Then, hopefully each week, but don't get us wrong, we'll take more people. We'll gladly, seriously, take more people. We have more bodies. That just means that we have more people that can go lay eyes on projects every single week. And so we would not be sad to see that happen at all. But and I also think too that there are a few misconceptions about exactly what happens when we get large rain events. You know, there are going to be times that your erosion controls, and we can always do better, as we are proposing. The erosion controls are just not going to hold up because of the amount of water that you get on a site. And so when that happens, that's when it's really, really important that we get out there and get eyes on the site and actually get the contractor, get the GC, and get those fixed. So, you know, when you see that, we always appreciate people giving us a heads up if you've caught something before we have. But also know that when you have a big site and we have a lot of rain, you're going to see a little turbid water that's going to leave the site. But that doesn't mean that the erosion controls didn't work as they were constructed. It just means we got a lot of rain, and then we need to go get out there and make sure that the contractor, you know, has those fully functional. But like I said, we'll always take more boots on the ground, because I think that's, as we continue to grow and get more projects, that's what we're going to need to be able to be the most successful.
So what I want to do, live.
I had
Have you
a
got me?
question real quick,
Sure.
if I could, please. When you're going through the new drainage requirements, could you kind of let us know how we're visibly going to see these changes, how they're going to be different from the current, you know, black cloth fences that fail all the time, just so that we can be aware of what we need to be looking for, because there are a lot of people that do watch out for failings to turn into planning.
Okay.
All right, so we've got about 15 minutes to undertake the process similar, basically the same as we did last time, which is to have each of you think about this topic, which was new water quality requirements. And you've got stickies in front of you. And the question being posed is, what do you want to see the new code do to address this topic? So you'd put one comment per sticky. You'd start with a verb or something kind of action-oriented. Here's what we'd like to see the new code do. We'll gather those. I see some folks have written them already. We'll put them into themes. And what this helps us do is identify the kinds of issues you all are concerned about. And as staff did with the last set of input, they'll be able to respond with regard to if it's addressed in the code, if it isn't fully addressed, if it falls outside of the code. So we're going to do that process now, and we'll answer any additional questions as we go.
No, not up yet.
Not for you? Okay. And I'm going to read them off so everybody here can hear them. What is more out/fill allowed in CO5 and CO5D? CD. Sorry, CD5D. Yeah, my eyesight's not as good as it used to be. All right. Consider 80% to 85% plus 1.5 inches to 1.5. Okay. Don't allow admin approval for more cut/fill in water quality 2. Our new CUSM fees that have been adopted take into consideration the additional staffing needed for erosion code enforcement. Okay. How will code violations for construction erosion controls be handled? Rules are great if they're enforced. Include the segment of the Blanco River that falls in the COSM jurisdiction to comply to the same standards as the SM River corridor. Increase the TSS removal from 80 to 85% along the San Marcos River corridor. 6.1.2.3, add Part D, no administrative adjustment or alternative compliance shall be allowed in water quality zone or buffer zone. Extend 85% TSS removal standard to transition zone and San Marcos River protection zone. Okay, we've got a clear theme going here. Increase water quality TSS across the entire city. It's a new concept. Allow water quality and buffer zones to extend beyond a 100-year floodplain. Extend recharge zone waterway rules to San Marcos River portion zone and transition zone. Okay, here's a question. Why not have higher than 80
to 85%, say 85 to 90%. Need to have better enforcement of construction erosion controls. Why not increase 1.25 to 1.5? Oops, wait, I gave you the wrong one. Increase rainwater capture to 1.5 inches, 90th percentile. Transition zone should go back to 89% TSS. Increase limits on impervious cover in buffer zone, okay. So I'm getting a lot of themes here. All right, apply stronger standards to contributing zone to align it with recharge zone, even if it's in the transition zone. Don't decrease percent of increased TSS along Old San Marcos River corridor. 6.4.2.1A, change not within the ETJ to include ETJ. 6.1.41A, change remove 80% of increase to remove 85% of increase. Okay, 6.1.4.1A, change first 1.25 inch of rainfall to first 1.5. Okay. 6.1.4.1A, change 85% to 90% annual non-exceedance storm. Okay, we got a few more. And if you've heard these themes up here, you don't need to readdress them. They'll be addressed by staff in their responses. 6.2.1.1C, insert and transition zone into the 5 acres within EAR Z clause. 6.2.2.2, 1.A, strike last sentence. Okay. 6.2.21A, very specific, 2A, strike last sentence. Okay. Require or give credit for rain garden features. Lower impervious cover on slopes to less than 15%. And we don't need exceptions to exceptions for cut and fill. Need to have solid standards, no admin changes. Okay, that's quite a lot. Okay, so the big themes, there was the comment just then and others on cut and fill. Increase impervious cover, TSS removal and capture, lots of comments about that. They'll be documented and responded to. Expand regulatory zones was another theme. Administrative adjustments, fees, enforcement. We've got a few more. We've got rain garden features. And are those all falling into the percentages?
Yes, this is cut and fill.
Greg, do you want to? Topographical. Oh, typographical, so errors in the text. So do you want to give any feedback to any of these questions? Or does anybody have any live questions now that you've kind of seen the themes that have emerged from your all's responses? Is there anything you want to ask Greg or deliberate around yourselves with regard to these big themes that have emerged?
Sure.
On the cut and fill, we have exceptions for exceptions, and I'm just wondering how that came about and why we're not more firm on these are our cut and fill requirements. And I know I've asked Lori about this before, and that may have changed, but I'm looking at both of them, the old one and the new one, and I just really want to make sure that our cut and fill standards are solid and can't be changed significantly by administrative changes.
Well, first I'll just say that we didn't change, our intent was not to change the cut and fill standards from the previous code. So it should have been verbatim from the previous code into the new code. And let's see.
In the CD, in the downtown area, that has allowable, and then in the other. So I think in general, and I'm just going to stand by Greg like this and talk. And Abby, I'll ask Abby too. You don't need to. is one of the things that we did look at and talk about internally was in our intensity zones, when you have a parking garage facility where you anticipate you might have subsurface. I think that's maybe some of the thought process behind on those sites where you're entirely constructing and it as in the cut and fill would be related to that building. I think that's what the underlying issue was on that CD5 and CD5D. Abby, you might want to weigh in.
Those zones would be the same zones as the CD5D is going to be replacing our current T5 downtown. So that's the current standard T5 downtown, and that was done, as Lori pointed out, based on the fact that when you're downtown and you have buildings that have parking garages, you, by nature of building that type of building, you have to do cuts that are allow you to build that type of building that's allowed in that zone.
I think the other thing in there is that the cut and fill can't be in a water quality or buffer zone unless it has to not hydrologically affect the 100-year floodplain. But beyond that, before, I mean, administratively, it was up to 4 feet, and then anything beyond that had to come to council, and that hasn't really changed. So.
I thought I saw in there that it could be administratively changed to 8 feet, and then beyond that it could get more than 8 feet.
Well, I think that's if you had 4 feet of fill and 4 feet of cut, so maybe a total, but we'll look into that.
Okay. And I'm concerned about it downtown because our water table is an issue there. And have y'all looked into that, like how cut and fill affects, if you're hitting the water table, what do you do aside from pump it out? I mean, is that going to create more limitations on the cut and fill in the downtown area, and shouldn't we stay away from the water table?
Well, what we've required before is you have to have a geotechnical report that addresses the groundwater associated with it and protects that. I know that's something the challenges we did with the, what is oh, I'm so bad with names.
The local?
Yeah, the local, that's it. That's the one I was thinking of. I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the seeps and springs that are shallow in the downtown area can, with engineering design, be taken care of to be routed around a building or to not be impacted. And of course, the geotechnical study and the building plans would reflect whatever system they would, one, identify the seeps and springs, and then also the design plans, which we would look at, would show any kind of engineered system to route it around the building.
Yeah, I just worry, in particular, when I saw the local being built, all the silt and the runoff and everything. I mean, it's just going down into the water table. So, it's not. It just concerns me, hitting the water table, and I don't know, Lori, do you have any input on how does that affect water quality when we have construction on top of the water table and is seeping down into the ground?
Well, I mean, infiltration is a treatment for that kind of silt. I mean, you're wanting it to get back in the groundwater, and that silt's going to get filtrated out. I mean, I think that probably the bigger concern would be just the pollutants that might be attached with that.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert in this area,
Yeah.
so I mean, I would say that the main recharge for the river, of course, is what infiltrates in the aquifer recharge zone and gets to the aquifer, and then again translates to flow in the river. So a lot of the seeps and springs, while they're there, they're not a significant source of flow to the river in the downtown area. I'm not an expert, but I'll just say that. But I mean, the base flow comes from the recharge zone, so which you see flowing down the river most of the time. So.
Will you explain one more time how the developer does core samples for the water table and underground springs in the downtown area? What do we require them to do?
Well, if they have a foundation, do we?
For underground parking garages mostly.
So, and this is not my purview for review, so I would imagine that do we require plans for foundations? So the foundation plan is something that we would review, and I'd imagine we require a geotechnical study to look at as well. And
so can you describe the geotechnical study, like how many cores we take? I mean, do we feel like it's good enough to avoid hitting springs? Because even when you have to reroute springs, you're still disrupting flows, and they might not reroute properly.
So one thing that I think that I touched upon that may help in this instance is remember we talked about, and on that flow chart you saw watershed protection plans and kind of intersecting with various other permits. One of the transitions that's happened a little bit over time is that the site plan, which is you already have a platted lot, maybe there's already been development there, you're not going through that, is you have zoning in place, you're coming back in and you're going right to directly to a building and a comprehensive. One of the things that we have identified is that if you've never had a watershed protection plan where some of these environmental considerations have been looked at, instead of attaching them to that site plan, which is a plan that most of the time, we take a lot of pride in moving through the system quickly. It's checking, more of the planning, landscaping, things like that, parking appropriateness, is requiring a watershed protection plan if there's not been one done at that point. So I think some of the modifications we have might allow us to take a stronger look at that. But to go back, when you have a structure like that, you're going to have a geotechnical report that's going to cover, they're going to have done multiple soil samples based upon the size of the building and the foundation necessary to support it. And they're going to identify the groundwater, they're going to identify how deep they have to go in order to support that. Those could be used and looked by us to identify how they're handling that groundwater. So what we don't want them to do, and what we didn't want them to do with the local, is we don't want them to pump the groundwater out and dump it into the storm sewer system, which then flows directly to the San Marcos River. So what we required on the local was that they had to treat it first before they discharged it, and they really, I think they hauled it away. So those are the elements, that we're starting to identify how, when you get pretty far down, this isn't greenfield kind of development, it's redevelopment of existing, how we pull those environmental regulations in. But again, I think the underlying thing to keep in mind is that if the concept of allowing intense development in the downtown and in the Thorpe Lane areas is not what is supported, then that's in conflict with the comprehensive plan. It was part of that whole process went through this is areas that we are supportive of intense development. And so I think the responsibility is there for us to make sure that that development is done as an environmentally sensitive way as we can. And that's why we put that 25% trigger in there on floor area instead of others, because that way if somebody went up, they still had to come into compliance with it. But you can't, I don't want to say it in a negative way, but you can't have it both. You can't say this is where you want to grow, but then be too overly burdensome with all the regulations associated with it.
Just one more follow-up on that. So I understand that, and yes, we did say we wanted that, but if for any reason that's not really a great idea, then I guess we would really be looking upon experts to tell us, because your downtown has so much, your water table is at this level and there's so much moisture in springs, we don't recommend you go high dense in this area or this close to the river corridor. So when you do these geotechnical samples, are you testing for moisture to know how, when you start putting that weight on there, how much the building is going to be able to?
Oh yeah, that's
and
part
so
of
that's it's all moisture. But we know, and also with our springs, there might be, we might go through 10 or 15 years of fairly dry times, and all of a sudden we have springs popping up all over town we didn't even know existed. So when you're going in and doing these geotechnical studies, sometimes I'm wondering if they're even, can we even trust them 100% because of the way our springs work and our system works?
Well, I think you can trust them as appropriate in the time frame that they were taken. I mean, we know from the downtown project that the water table fluctuates up and down in the downtown. It always has. Sometimes we found it within 3 feet of the surface, and sometimes it goes down further. I think to what we have identified, Greg, and through the think tank, is initially the downtown was exempted from water quality requirements at all, and they were exempted from detention requirements. And through these changes, what we're proposing is those exemptions aren't valid anymore. That when you hit those thresholds, you are going to have to do water quality requirements. And we are creating, as you saw in the backup material that Greg will cover, a management district to allow fee in lieu of and payment for regional water quality. So we've taken a step forward. We may not have taken as great a step as maybe the council desires. We need to know that. I think the other thing that I would say is I have not, the Habitat Conservation Plan, nor the Water Quality Protection Plan, nor the Upper San Marcos Watershed Protection Plan has identified the springs and the water quality associated with what you're doing on the springs as an issue. That's not anything out there right now that is a red flag. So that's what we took our perspective from. And so as for our knowledge base now, we're telling you, we're giving you what the best is that we know about.
Thank you so much. So to keep us moving forward, I know, Greg, you have one more presentation next on
Yes.
new drainage requirements. So
Okay, go ahead.
Great.
All right, so as far as new drainage requirements, we had 3 strategies. One was to strengthen the link between the LDC and the floodplain ordinance. Second was to address impacts to adjacent properties. And third is to create a stormwater management fund / fee in lieu of. So for addressing impacts to adjacent properties, we already have language in the code that that talks about not impacting adjacent properties. But one area where we don't have it specifically addressed is in situations that you see here. Is if you have a site, say you wanted to develop here, and there's another site, lot, that you don't own adjacent to you, and water is flowing down this way, mostly a sheet flow situation, and say your street and your storm drain is right here. So with our proposed revision, if you were to develop, stormwater leaving your site must drain to an existing natural low or drainage easement. Otherwise, drainage easement and infrastructure must be dedicated or constructed. So again, if you develop this lot, you would be required to obtain an easement from this property and also construct improvements to contain the runoff from this site within the easement, and then to a point where you're now in a situation where there's public infrastructure or public right-of-way that could take care of the runoff.
I have one question on that.
Sure.
So in this scenario that you're showing us, would it then be possible that that property that you're showing that's vertical, if they were unable to obtain that easement from a surrounding property owner, then they could not develop their property? There's just no chance?
That's a good question. I would think you could probably look at different ways of getting your water to this situation, or to this location, I should say. I mean, you could perhaps go down this way Do you have any other ideas, Lori?
So one of the consistent problems that we've had in the many years that I've been at the city is this situation right here, where we have detention requirements and we shave that peak off so that the peak flow coming off the newly developed site doesn't exceed what was there before. But when it's all said and done, that downstream property owner consistently sees issues. And when the development community is given a choice to say, return it to sheet flow, they will invariably put a spreader along that property line and call it good. And it shaves the peak off, it complies with the requirements, but now that downstream property owner is dealing with much more volume of water than they had to deal with initially. And this is a relatively common practice in most communities to say, you know, you don't get to do that, you got to figure out a solution to get it to a natural course. And so if I had $1, I could retire for how many times I've had to deal with property owners calling and saying, why did the city allow this development to occur? I have so much more water on my property. And I'm saying they're fully compliant with our ordinances. And so that's really the genesis of this one.
Thank you.
It's more that will resolve this issue then? Okay.
Well, we also, we have more language in our code that talks about the responsibility to accept stormwater. So if you're, there's a responsibility to accept water from your adjacent neighbor also. So I guess that also kind of, I think, provides the impetus to say, hey, you as a property owner need to accept this water. And the best way to convey it, through the site so it's not going to impact you is through an easement and additional infrastructure.
If I may, so if I understand correctly, then your neighbor may have to, you're saying possibly have to accept some sort of.
State law.
Oh, it does. Okay. And okay, thank you.
Explain that to me again.
And Michael, Mr. Cosentino, our city attorney, is up front. State water law says you can't block upstream water from flowing through your site. So if it naturally flowed that way, you can't say, I'm not going to accept it anymore. And so that's really where we're going with this is I think what our goal would be is to ensure that the downstream property owner knows you can't just say, no, I don't want any of your water even though it flowed that way before. But the upstream property owner has to understand, hey, I got to work with this person to get it through their site. If the downstream property owner is accepting of a sheet flow condition, that's fine with them. They've got to come in and work it out and show that they've gotten that effort worked out. If it's an easement in a channel, if it's a pipe, this provides us that ability to say, you've got to go get that worked out.
So it's not a requirement then? It won't be a requirement?
No, we're not saying how they do it. We're saying they must do it.
But I'm saying so it would be optional if they want to do sheet or if they want to do this.
If the downstream property owner said, I accept your sheet flow, I want your sheet flow for some reason, then we're not going to tell them no, we're not going to let them discharge that sheet flow, but I doubt that's going to be the case.
So my concern with that would be, though, that property owner might not always be the property owner, and when the next guy comes in, he comes to the city and he starts complaining, saying, hey, I'm getting this sheet flow that's now flooding my back porch because we were getting intense rains this year. So I'm just curious that we might try to find some way to make it required all across the board so we don't have future property owners coming in complaining about the same thing y'all are hearing now all the time.
Well, and I guess maybe what I would say is if we had some downstream property owners that said, yes, I'll accept sheet flow, that we would somehow document that that was part of what was accepted and use that. Maybe it means it's a blanket easement for drainage across the property. It would be something that would give that forewarning to subsequent property owners.
Something else we added as a revision is that during construction, water surfaces up and downstream of the construction site cannot be raised. And why are we doing this? It provides further protection.
I'm sorry, sir. I've got a quick question on the water surfaces up or downstream cannot be raised. How do you address a development becoming basically an impoundment? So I understand the sheet flow is not supposed to be changed, but we have a situation here in town where it really was changed and it flooded the neighborhood. So is there anything, I know they're supposed to have flow-through features, but no one maintains those. Just something we need to think about. If you're going to build and have like a laminar sheet flow, it's not static, it's going to back up, it's going to go one way or the other. So I get it, it's supposed to go pass through, but what do we do when it goes back the other direction? We all know what I'm talking about, right?
Sure, and this, I think, two things. One is that when we get the plans in for construction and review them, if it's an area of concern, like in a major floodplain, then we're going to want to see how you're going to, what your construction process is going to be to build it, and have that in place, and so the contractor knows what it is, so that you don't run into that situation during construction. And second, with this in the code, now we can go and have a something we can point to in the code saying, hey, you know what, if it's out in the field during construction, that hey, you can't do that. You know, it's not allowed in our code, and we can enforce that.
I have a question. I had thought that we made this change, so I just want to verify. And it may not be true in all cases, but in the case of the wood situation, are we now requiring the filtration and the and all of that to be taken care of prior to building it, so that we don't wind up in the same situation? So would that be just in floodplain, or?
We handled it with floodplain, and now we're handling it in the rest of the code.
Okay, so now this will make it into the code, and they have to finish that before they can build out. Okay, thank you.
The proposed revision also created a stormwater management fund. And this fund would help with regional water quality and retrofit BMPs. It'll help fund regional detention and floodplain storage, and also help fund projects to increase flow conveyance. It in addition creates an urban stormwater management district, which are these magenta areas right here, which are the intensity zones within the watershed of the San Marcos River. And this provides appropriate stormwater management in these high intensity areas. And of course, to participate within the fund, you must show that you have no adverse impacts. And why are we doing this? It provides flexibility in stormwater solutions in these areas. It's listed as a comp plan goal. And there are many water quality retrofits that were identified in the WQPP that will help, that will be funded as a part of this creation of the Stormwater Management Fund. And those different sites are shown here as green dots.
I have a question. On your previous slide, you talked about the building being placed on that location. And if it were just left to be water flowing, sheet flow across the neighbor's property, there would be an increased amount of water flow as a result of the impervious cover upstream. Is that correct?
It would be an increase in the volume.
Increase in the volume.
With our detention ordinance, the actual flow rates would not be increased.
So with that, if you bypass it and you put it into a storm drain, then in effect you've taken that increased volume and you've just shifted it downstream, right?
The increased volume, yes.
So now we've got stormwater management, these districts that you talk about, but there are other areas that are impacted by that increased amount of flow. And one of the concerns we had in our flood workshop was downstream impacts of base flood elevation over time. We'd seen a degradation. In fact, we've seen 3 feet of increase over 30 years, sort of a trend line of 1 foot per year increase in base flood elevation. Does our code address in some way the impacts of that downstream increased flow in terms of how do we mitigate the impact of that to downstream neighbors and that continued erosion of base flood elevation?
Absolutely. So on our code right now, we have a detention requirement. So you cannot increase the flows off your property. So if you maintain that detention requirement, then you're not increasing flooding downstream.
Okay, well, let me go back to that.
Okay.
I'm assuming throughout time there have been detention requirements upstream of areas that we've seen an increased base flood elevation already, correct?
Say that again?
I would assume that, doesn't state law require there to be a certain detention for properties upstream?
No.
In the city we do, correct? In the city we do?
We only had detention since what year, Lori?
Okay, so it just began in the 80s. Okay, so we've had it 30 years and we'll hopefully have it going forward. But I guess the question is, have we looked at that in the code to determine whether or not, given the significant rain events that we've had, is it significant enough to accomplish the objectives that we have of not impacting downstream neighbors as a result of increased velocity or increased volume of flow?
I'm back up here with my friend. So I would say that part of what we do is we attack that in a 2-prong approach. The first prong is the one we have addressed right now, where we are moving forward to capture more, that 85th or the desire of the 90th percentile storm events. If you think about it, and Greg and I were talking because he was helping explain it to me, is if we go home and it rains tonight and I ask you, how much rain did you get? Probably 85% of the time or 90% of the time you're going to say, I got an inch, I got an inch and a half. That's the preponderance of the storm events that we get. And so where we're going with the stream protection volume now all of a sudden says, we're going to capture that, everybody's going to capture it, and they're going to hold it on their site for a much longer period of time, and maybe most of it will infiltrate in. So that's a step forward. What we do right now in terms of how do we address ongoing, that's what the drainage utility does. Remember, when we go out there and we look at conveyance and we look at these regional kinds of things, everybody in this city, in your house and in your business, is charged a rate based upon how much impervious cover you have on your lot. And you're not getting a credit. We set it up to allow credits for detention, but we have never established that. We have just said, look, based upon the improvements that need to be done, the capacity that needs to be built, this is how everyone pays in to do it. So that's kind of the funding mechanism that we use. And so when we design a storm sewer pipe, we look at what is the maximum amount of pervious cover based upon the development that could occur in this site. And we know by zoning categories and land use how much that is. And we size that infrastructure to carry it, just like we do our wastewater pipes and our water pipes and everything else. It's part of that utility to look at that. So that's how we do it right now. I mean, Then
let me ask one follow-up then, and I'll stop. I think we all know the drainage fund is probably the least funded enterprise fund that we have,
Right.
given the size of the problem that we have.
That's right.
So how do we, unless it's a growth issue of how do we allow for increased development, increased impervious cover, how do we rejigger that calculation so that development that comes in does take into account the impact, the downstream impacts it has, because I know we dealt with the floodplain issues, but we're dealing with areas outside the floodplain now.
So I would think we're looking at it, handling it two ways. One, you're making up for, San Marcos is 175 years old, and we've been detaining for 30. So you're making up for a lot of lost time in terms of how you do infrastructure. We are in the process of updating, we will be updating that drainage utility fee based upon new impervious cover calculations across the city, new assumptions once we get our LIDAR this fall. That'll be something we'll look to bring back to the city council. The other thing is I think that what we're proposing with this fee in lieu of is we all know there are certain locations in town where people don't have to detain. There's adequate infrastructure adjacent to a waterway where it works better for them to release before the peak comes down. What this fee will do is we will say, you're very lucky, you don't have to detain, and you've proven to us you're not creating a downstream impact, but you're still going to have to pay because everybody pays for drainage. And so if you don't do detention on site because you've proved that you have capacity downstream, then you're still going to pay a fee to the city. That's what this fee in lieu of, and it's based upon some of the construction costs and land costs associated with detention, and that would go into that regional fund that would allow us to make capacity. So it's another way, another revenue source for us to get funding to come in, but the drainage utility you're absolutely right. It's going to take us a while to get up to speed on that.
Keep us moving forward on this topic. You already had a lot of discussion, but again, with specifics, what do you want to see the new code do to address this topic? So one comment per sticky, starting with a verb, helps it be an action-oriented comment staff can respond to. New drainage standards. I realize I will never buy red stickies again because it's impossible to read. All right, I'm going to start reading these to y'all. Assess fees sufficient to pay the true cost of getting water downstream safely. How will the CoSM charge the developer to create the stormwater management fund? Will the CoSM need to pay for regional stormwater management and then recover fees from future developers at a later date? If the CoSM will need to fund a portion of regional stormwater management, where will these initial funds be generated from? So all around funding. This last one, need to address development becoming impoundment? Yeah, like an impoundment, like a dam. Who maintains flow-through feature? Who maintains the flow-through feature? Inspection, maintenance, enforcements. Okay, so the intricacies of addressing all of that. Issue adequate funding for the drainage utility. Okay. Any other comments on this topic? Great, you bet. So this is funding. Tighter flood controls for construction increase inspections. Perhaps have a team and determine how many FTEs would be needed for adequate enforcing. Okay, so really maintenance and enforcement and funding. It's like the mechanisms of how seems to be the big questions, and a lot of these are questions from y'all rather than particular suggestions. So what we're going to do, I think if you've got do you have any other further questions? You had a lot of conversation on this one, but I want to keep us on time. We've got 3 more topics to cover, so I want to make sure that everybody's good. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll come back, actually let's give you a little more than that, come back at 10 after 7, and then we'll start again. We've got 3 additional topics to cover.